So good evening and welcome. My name is Nancy Knowles. I'm president of the board of directors at Art Center East, and I'm very excited to be here tonight to hear our reading from John Sibley Williams. Glad to have you with us. I would like to just say a few words about the Art Center, and we also like to start with a land acknowledgement, so I'll start there. We recognize that we all live and work on Indigenous homelands. Specifically, Art Center East and its programs reside on the ancestral homelands of the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce peoples. Our land acknowledgement is one way of many towards showing respect and understanding that these lands carry the stories of their struggle for survival and identity through the effects of colonization. We respect our Indigenous neighbors' resiliency, reciprocity with the natural world, and infusion of arts into traditional lifeways. This acknowledgement challenges us to consider Indigenous perspectives, learn Indigenous histories, seek input from and partnership with Indigenous groups, and take time to participate in present-day Indigenous events and learning opportunities. We invite Indigenous people and groups to continue to collaborate with Art Center East on our community offerings. May we learn from the past and improve the future. So I just would like to say also about Art Center East that we are in our 45th year. So we're having an anniversary this year. We were founded in 1977 as the Eastern Oregon Regional Arts Council. We have been through a number of permutations since then and are currently housed in a Carnegie Library in La Grande, Oregon. And we are a member-supported, grant-supported organization that provides art services locally, as well as artists in rural schools activities for our 10-county region. So we're really glad to have you here tonight. And I would like to turn it over to Amelia Ettinger. Thank you for being here, Amelia, to introduce John.
Hi, hello everybody, and thank you for being here tonight. I have the pleasure to introduce to you John Sibley Williams, the author of 9 poetry collections, including Scale Model of a Country at Dawn by Cider Press, and The Drowning House by Elixir Press Award, and As One Fire Consumes Another by Horizon Poetry Prize, Skin Memorized by Backwater Prize, University of Nebraska Press, and Summon, a juxtaposed chapbook prize. You can buy his books directly from him or in the links provided to you at the chat. His book, Sky Burial, New and Selected Poems, is forthcoming and is translated in its translated form to the Portuguese by a Portuguese press, Do Lado Esquerdo. He has been nominated for the Pushcart and Astoundings 27 times. He is the winner of numerous awards, including the Wabash Prize for Poetry, Phil Booth Award, Philly Smart Young Prize, and the Locke Miller Prize. He serves as an editor for the Infectionist Review and founder of the Cesura Poetry Worship Series. Without further ado, here is John.
Oh, thank you, Amelia, and thank you, Nancy. That's beautiful. Bios always make me uncomfortable. But thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming. I know that especially if you were at Sanders, you may be so inspired that you want to sit down and write instead of come to another poetry reading. I know I probably would. So I very much appreciate everyone being here. So I always start every reading with the same poem in dedication to my mother, who passed away about 6 years ago. But she, from what I understand, she read to me when she was pregnant every day. She actually propped books up on her belly and would just read entire novels to me every single day. And maybe that's why I started, I mean, who knows, but maybe that's partly why I started writing. So I started with short stories, not poetry. That I started about when I was about 20. But when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I wrote my first full-length short story of 10 pages or so. And I think that had to do with the the fact that she was doing that, reading so much to me. So I like to thank her for that. So this poem from a few books ago is called Death is a Work in Progress. My mother says fox, while gesturing toward an old red wagon abandoned in our yard for decades. Fox, a word so cavernous her entire body vanishes into it. Body of misfiring electrons, scattered images, no contexts. Body that is mainly just a body now. No other animal knows how to be this incomplete. I think if you were a fox, coyotes would have eaten you by now. But I say, yes, Mom, I'll climb into that fox and let you pull me through the high grass one more time. I always start with that one. So, so thank you. For anyone who has ever had anyone who is suffering from whether it's dementia or something on the way when they start to mislabel things, always tough. Yeah, so if you don't mind, I'm going to read, I guess, a few poems from. I get 2 books. Somehow 2 books have already come out this year. Odd enough, but so just a couple poems from the Drowning House. So the first poem here, a number of the poems I have in this collection are probably half a dozen or so. What I did was I tried to get a historical figure, generally someone who had been through a significant amount of suffering, and then I paired them up with an artist, and then I tried to use the artist's imagery in order to tell the person's story. So this is Emmett Till, Edward Hopper. And hopefully, I don't know how public education is these days, I'm 40 now, but hopefully everyone knows who Emmett Till is. I certainly hope so. So Emmett Till, Edward Hopper. In your mouth, 1,000 unpainted churches. Steeples snapped off like baby teeth in an apple. Rusted bells trying so hard to ring, ringing. Crows along your restless edges, where clapboard meets sky in storm. The sky is always storming. Skin can be its own broken republic. Everywhere, overgrown rail tracks and a few white people who don't know what to say to each other. Not anymore. Truth is married to the surface of things. The surface is a lighthouse overlooking wreck after wreck. No ships here anymore. Nothing left to cradle and swing safely into harbor. All sorts of things swing. All sorts of women sit on the knife's edge of a bed, half naked, staring out a half naked window. All sorts of men are tossed over bridges after whistling a little tune. Come back, crows, bells, edges. In you, let the night see its face. So every single image there is directly from an Edward Hopper piece. Something that always struck me as much as I love Edward Hopper, the pieces that have humans in them, and of course most don't, but those that do, they're all very, very melancholic, emotionally distanced white people. That's just something I'd always noticed in those images. They're just, and there's something about that in the time periods and everything too. And there's something that's like, what if they're beginning to realize something larger that's going on, and that's why they can't talk to each other. So that's kind of how that fell together. This next one, another theme that shows up quite a bit in my poems is the idea of history. Well, that one did too, but trying to bring history into the present, how the history may affect the present. And also sometimes looking at my own family's potential past. It's all hypothetical. I don't have a family tree to follow. But I like to, given that I'm a Caucasian, I tend to try to consider what ancestors may have been like, and try to bring that into the present. So this poem is called "The Dead Just Need to Be Seen, Not Forgiven." That old man in the photo our family never talks about, known best for tracking runaway slaves. Tonight we drag him from the basement up these loose wood stairs and set out a plate of salted cabbage and rabbit. So long since I've asked why the empty chair at our table. With all the warmth the body has to give, we give up on measuring the darkness between men. Dust and dusk enter and are wiped from the room. The names we call each other linger luminous and savage, still. That tree I used to hang tires from holds tight to its dead centuries. The light swinging from its branches we call rope-like, which implies there's no longer rope. Tonight, we'll wash the burnt out stars from his hair and all the crumbs from his beard. The misfired bullet of his voice we let burn as it must. I'm always trying to understand history without understanding without empathizing, if that makes sense. I think we have to that's why we have to see these things, even if we don't forgive them and shouldn't forgive them. I certainly hope that wasn't my great-grandfather, but just that part I made up, so I hope not. This next poem from the book is called "The Moon is Two Half Moons Joined Together." Her body still yoked to histories retold. So often, even her great-grandmother who lived it cannot remember the river's name she crossed to get here. Tigris, Rio Grande, Euphrates, how the men and more men, and when the men were done, they'd touch finger to forehead to chest to shoulder and zip up their flies. How sometimes the world works like that. The bullet passes right through, and on the other side, another language to learn, another God to feed, and a child that wears half your face. Try not to take it as a sign how they see you, my mother says. The books the kids don't read don't mention it. This name, that first name. The constellations it takes to turn sky into map. The boys still rock, paper, scissor their way to cruelty, which hurts less than their taking her as white, which at least means they love what they see. And a red clay stain that once was a river. That was actually in dedication, I guess, to one of my first girlfriends in high school. Was that actually is so loosely based on her story. She was the product of a mother coming up from Central America up through Mexico and was assaulted, and that was the unknown father. So it's kind of loosely based on that. I hope no one showed up for happy poems. I apologize sincerely if that's the case. Same part of the country though. Two more from this book, if I may. When I wrote this poem, I assumed this would no longer be a problem. It seems like it still is, unfortunately. Separations. Silver wires partition bodies from the bodies they birthed 6 years ago in wire-thin stucco houses, open-walled to dust and sky. An infinite backdrop of silent scars, and in the foreground, little changes of the uniforms, but the faces pushing up from them like sunflowers, uncertain which way the wind wants them to sway. A migraine of cameras stalks the well-lit edges. Wash basins overflow with tears. Another appeal to horizon burns with forsaken promises. It's true. We've always run toward the wrong light. Always a somewhere that hurts less than home. Families subdivide until there is nothing left but memory and wail and holding that wail up to their ears like song, and singing it. I would have assumed by now everyone that would not be the case anymore down in the southern border. And then yeah, one more poem from this. This is the title is going to say it all in terms. When I read this as a fact, scientific fact, I just was so shocked that, and I think this is catgut, but harp strung with gut still make music after 2,000 years. And when I read that, I was like, that's obviously the title of a poem. That has to be. 12 unpaired shoes hang windless from a wire, threading streetlights together. Eventually, swallows reclaim them. Without the need for twig and try, they raise a family in our cavities. My son points a toy gun to my temple. Each bang reminds me my father was once a mountain that crumbled beneath me. How the sheer terror of cradling so much weightlessness can flatten landscapes and raise cities. Or the birds remind me, return warmth to discarded things. That there is nothing that is not home hurts more than the imagined bullet drilling into my skull. I cannot fail to forgive it. As he tightens his tiny lips and blows through me, finally, I am song. I still feel a bit awkward when I was writing these books, about a year and a half ago or so. That was before one of my children had transitioned. So I feel weird saying son in a lot of these poems. It makes me a little uncomfortable, but that's kind of the passing down of masculinity and that kind of thing is still important to the poem. So that's why I haven't changed it, but still feel kind of awkward about it. Oh yes. So I wanted to, and thank you so much. I actually decided, I haven't read any of these before. So I chose just a couple newer poems, all written this year, to try to read. Oh boy, fingers crossed. So this one, bring it up on my screen. There we go. So this one it was actually based on reading an article about Sean Sherman, who's a Lakota Sioux chief and chef and cookbook author. I read an interesting article about him. And the name of the article is the name of the poem, which is "At This Table We Sing with Joy, with Sorrow." That was another one of those. I just read that and I was like, well, that has to be the title of the poem. So for Sean Sherman. If not for the body, let's rafter this old table up like once believed in hymns, simply for the sake of it. Let's brush the dust of dead stars from the lacy cloth, scrape our plates free of what our grandparents failed to finish, and our children, hopefully, will never learn to swallow. Every night, it seems the worst of us takes over, and again, the table sinks out of reach. The glass always half empty, and we empty it. All this amaranth scattered across the floor so we can hear our ghosts when they enter and when they leave us. So much unwilded rice and unprepared longing. How we cannot stop mending what is not yet broken and killing to prove the world still needs us. There are still so many unlit fires in our ovens. Sometimes I forget there's meant to be a difference between us and them, between an unpainted and a burning cross. My daughters carry my name like a cross over their tender little shoulders. I no longer know what to say when asked for the truth. Whose truth will keep the sorrow from their song? Someone handcrafted this unvarnished oak so we might one day take stock of one another. Let's prop our history up on piles of unread books so nothing wobbles, so the legs grow equally tall. So even that uncle, they say, struggled to hurt others the way he would never be hurt, can join us, all that ugliness intact. And his wife, who conformed to her container like goat milk. Let's sit, please, at this table between our own mixed race daughters and the hate that you would have had for them. Here's some crushed berries for your toast, a dull knife to spread it. Outside, nothing has changed of the American sycamore, apart from what we've chosen to hang from it. Okay, I've never read that one before. So that, yeah, my children are half Japanese and half Caucasians. That was the mixed respect there. You definitely got a little nervous there last year during COVID when suddenly the violence was rising, yeah, for Asian Americans in particular. But so I guess, yeah, just two more brand new ones. None of these I've read before. Gets me a little nervous, but a little excited too. This poem is called Because Everything Here is a Brightness. In this version, the sky smuggle stars over a horizon's barbed border without a single shot fired. And someone is always emptying our cages of their children. Another folds into pollen, into comb, into a sweetness that carries no sting. And because we were given so much at first, it's okay when a little is taken back. When running half naked in the backyard, my daughters don't ask why the world will soon shield its eyes from their bodies, or stare longingly, or touch, or worse. The country their great-grandparents fled, in the country that interned them. And today, the way our neighbors spit their venom cannot, in this lullabied version, take root under our skin, or swell, redden. No, this vibrant sidewalk chalk doesn't mean someone's fallen. Yes, our fields will forever refuse to age into cemeteries. I promise these doors where drawing on your bedroom wall will swing and stay open, widely, wildly. And my hesitant, half-broken hands will always ache toward light because of your light, because this sky, because everything here is a brightness, and the stars singeing your palms that I pray will never heal. Somewhat of a parent poem. Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is going to come up in a future poem, but my wife's grandparents were in the Japanese internment camps in Idaho and in Washington, so that's where that kind of came in. And try one more new one, I guess. Whew. This poem, love, I don't know if anyone's read Marcelo Hernandez Castillo. If anyone's read his poetry book, I think he just has the one out from Boa Editions. One of the best poetry books I've read in absolutely forever. Up there with Ocean Vuong and all those types of absolutely just incredible, books that everyone has read or should read. Anyway, absolutely adore his work. So this poem is called Catalog, beginning with a line from Marcelo Hernandez Castillo. The music stopped playing years ago, but we're still dancing. The naked maple still has so many leaves to release before we have any right to call it dead. How our children out back wildly thrash angels into snow without losing their divinity. Last summer, the field we've worked generations until it no longer resembles a field, crept its green up the rusty machinery, choked our blades, overtook the unlit burn barrel, and we are no longer able to torch the photographs that we'd prefer to forget. Nothing about the past has failed to hurt. Still, eraser. Still, the boughs hold tight their nooses and moonlight finds a way through them. When my mother died, I thought, like a clear-cut forest, the fire in my lungs would refuse to spread, that I'd forget the weight of her hand over mine, carefully slicing apples from their core, leaving each seed undamaged and replantable. When my daughter taught me her gender, her music grew so damn true, I almost cried the dust off the ill-fitting name we'd given her as a gift. As a gift, she guides my hard hand into the soft indent she's left. Yes, the world stopped listening years ago. Still, the field breaks green through the snow beneath us. I almost wish you could have heard that one. Oh, thank you. Sorry, I got a little. So maybe then I guess I'll read some poems from this book, which just came out a couple weeks ago. Scale model of a country. So get to the tab. You see the tab? I can't get to the tab. Tabs get all sticky. Okay. Okay. So this one, for I'm sure everyone knows the image of a, maybe some of you have one, but a butterfly, you know, kind of pinned up behind glass. Or I remember, I think it was in middle school where we had to dissect them. So that's kind of the image in the head here for a careful study post-mortem. No matter how many pins hold it down, the wings tremble. In your mind, still attempting flight, flutter. Like any child, terrified that every body is part yours. Even this strange mess, speckled black in gold, like midnight in the stars that define its edges. That there are edges at all hurts. Shouldn't the dead carry less weight, less expectation of awe? The pages begin to fill themselves. Measurements, comparisons, organs so small you're not sure that all interiors aren't ash. Like what rests, useless and cooling, beneath the fire your father last night showed you how to light. Mostly, he said, so you won't keep asking when your mother will return. I can never just keep a poem about one thing. It always just moves in different directions. Never know where a poem's gonna go. Oh, this is a slightly shorter one. This poem is called Conch, like the shell. I admire the hollow, the keeping things in. Even after the sea has coughed it up, how it never stops ringing with home. In the whirl and whirl of it all, a small note taped to the inside of my heart. Remember, there is always something to forgive, to be forgiven for. How smoothly the past bleeds into now. On my sleeve, the faded white farmhouse I take to burning each night in my mind. Everyone I have ever loved inside. The tide as it inches in, swallowing sand and all my brief castles. In a shell so sonorous, I almost forget its missing body. Oh, thank you. Couple more, yeah. Oh, so I gotta drink a lot of water. Sore throat. So yeah, so this next poem begins with a brief quote from Langston Hughes, which is, "Today you will write about lights." The poem is, yeah, I forgot. This is the one that has there are 3 words in it: Minidoka, Manzanar, and Harmony, which were all internment camps, which is something you would need to know for the poem to make sense. I hadn't heard of them, or 2 of them, until getting to meet my wife's grandmother. She was pretty much raised, spent most of her formative years in these 3 camps. This is called Our Pasts Like Lighthouses. I saw the sign, scuffed and hooked, over a boarded up doorframe, freed from meaning only open or closed, doctor or butcher, just a beautifully blank face gone all impartial and true. Each brick shattered window its own cathedral, its own eye. Finally, with history holstered, the barrel but lukewarm, the fossils of fallen stars have a chance to shine again, to be dusted off into dust our future ancestors. My daughter, for example, how little her skin resembles mine. How if this were 1944, she and her brother would be displaced in Minidoka or Manzanar. Harmony, harmony. How she loves to say that word without the weight of context. How like a lighthouse, she scans every goddamn corner of her safe little sea in search of some wreck to save, to guide back into harbor. Today, it's my heart. Love, thank you for that. And for this rotted old wooden sign, briefly, we will leave our names on. Believe it or not, that's actually, although it ended up going in places I wouldn't have otherwise expected, there isn't, I'm not sure if everyone here, a lot of people here I know are certainly in Oregon. There was just, on the very first time we ever took our kids to the ocean, I think it was over by Depot Bay or so, there was just some old wooden sign that you couldn't, it was so sanded down by salt that you couldn't actually read what the word was. And there was, I don't know, that just, sometimes maybe that's the case for all of us. It just takes that one tiny little image that's easy to forget, just a little thing everyone walks by. And somehow that became the poem. Just a few more from this. Yeah, just a couple quick more. This is one that I know people talk about. People talk about the places where it's dark for a month straight, but they never talk about the fact that it's also light for a month straight, and that's equally difficult. And I actually did spend some time up in northern Iceland, and I was with an ex at the time, and that the relationship crumbled not long afterwards. So maybe that's something to do with this. That's what the poem is, at least. But that idea of just it always being light, you need some darkness. So this is called Forever Daylight. Again, the sun fails to dissolve, and I cannot wash the light from your hair. The world stands excruciatingly visible, stuck in its own song. What the night must steal to give us something to rediscover about ourselves never leaves our hands. No gauzy horizon, no ambiguity, nothing to unlearn. We draw the curtains, but even this is a candle. Even the bent heads of ice caps melting, the fjords rising. These sheep are not the dreaming kind. Rugged, furious, walking cliff sides as if water. That something can have no gods at all and still be holy. That we are finally seeing ourselves in the full light of another's eyes and cannot stop flinching. Our throats gone gravel and road salt from all this ceaseless awe. Has anyone ever experienced one of those places before? My goodness. Like, oh, have you, David? Yeah, that shouldn't surprise me. If you're about to travel around the world on a boat, that should surprise me. Yeah, it's incredible. It's actually almost harder, I found. That much light as opposed to that much darkness. So if I may, before I'm just going to read two more quick poems, then take our break. And thank you again, and Nancy and Amelia, thank you so, so much. And thank you everyone for coming. Yeah, I'll read two more. And again, yeah, obviously if anyone's interested, somewhere at the very, very top of the chat are some links and my email if you want a copy from me and that kind of stuff. So this poem is called Salinas. Miles pass, breaths, landscapes scorched by the window, upturned faces everywhere, hunting for rain. Lettuce, wild vines, insects, and the things that eat them. Undocumented work going on in the deepest recesses of summer. The smell of machines, ungreased levers, working each other up into wine. A horse on the horizon, a jangle of belled goats, thirst, hands, they're splitting. Our headlights stay on all day to remind us to see. Nothing says stay, nothing has to. We are pulled in too many directions to make a home of things. Proof that we were ever here is already disappearing. I have a lot of poems about privilege, and that certainly is one of them. Just driving down the road, seeing all this work being done, and I'm in my car just driving by. So this will be my final poem for tonight. Thanks so much. Luckily, my kids are 5 now, so they no longer suffer from this as infants do. But I wrote this when they were still dealing with it, which was object permanence. Something is no longer in their face, and it doesn't exist anymore. So this poem is called Object Permanence. Everything's still here, even after hidden behind the world's back, stolen from view, presumably erased from existence. Like a loved one, you have no photograph to grieve. Like that red wagon my father broke and scrapped and said I had only imagined dragging through our garden, which once, and therefore still, throbbed the morning green. If leaving infancy behind has taught me anything, it's never assumed that the disappeared cannot return. If what I've lost over the years is a lesson, it's that nothing returns in its original form. See, my mother would say, how the pale blue ball I've thrown up into the sky is now a moon, gorgeously unattainable. Please see me like that. Thank you so, so, so much.
Thank you very much, John. Wow. That was just delightful. I'm still letting it wash over me. So thank you. I want to give an opportunity for folks to ask questions. So are there any questions for John about his work?
I have one. And I was a little bit late. I'm sorry. I was down. I thought this was going to be in person. I walked down to the ACE building. It was locked. So anyway.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, well, this is safer anyway. Anyway, I just wondered if my brother married a woman who was of Japanese descent, and her grandparents or parents were in internment camps too. And I just wondered, because a few years ago when I was teaching where I was from in Kansas City, we had the whole campus did this book, When the Emperor Was Divine, by Julie Otsuka, I guess I'm pronouncing it right, Otsuka. Have you read that?
I have not. I have heard of it. I've heard the title, but I have not read it.
Yeah, it's written from the point of view mainly from a young boy whose family is moved and interned, and I think it's beautiful. It's remarkable. Like I say, we used it for the whole campus where I taught, not just the English classes. It was the read of the year or whatever. So I thought about that. And then I bought my sister-in-law, who was Japanese, I sent her a copy of it, and her son. So, because he had some of the same with the former administration and all of the biases that have been leaping out. And his wife was pregnant, and then he started thinking, oh my God, we're bringing this daughter in this world, and which they named Mariko Joy, which I thought was a cool name, and it sounded very Japanese. But he seems to be okay now, but he was very frightened for a while. So that her poetry brought that to mind. It's beautiful poetry, by the way.
No,
Excellent lines.
I know, I absolutely understand. My twins were born.
Oh wow!
My twins were born just a few months before the that particular administration's election. And yeah, I remember we were just holding these tiny, 3-month-olds or whatever, just my wife and I just crying, having absolutely no idea what world they were about to enter into. Yeah, but yeah, absolutely. The internment camps. Yeah, I know my. It's odd that my wife's grandmother, who still is with us, late 90s or mid 90s, she pretty much grew up there, and the government took their farm. They had a farm, an onion farm out in Idaho. Just took the farm. Everything's gone. Every belonging is gone. And then put them in the internment camp. She was there for some years. But then the person that would end up being her husband, also Japanese, he was part of this famous American bombing squad. That there's a all Japanese American bombing squad that bombed Japan, and actually had more medals than any other whatever the phrase is. I'm not a military person. Squad, whatever. Than anyone else in World War II, and they were Japanese people attacking Japan for us. And it was kind of weird that they ended up becoming, Yeah,
I know. And that's why, I mean, there's law cases where it was over-inclusive because it included people like that, and yet under-inclusive because there were no Germans interred. I hope I'm not stepping on any feet, but
as far as I know,
no. Interesting.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Anyway, but yes, I love your work too. Beautiful.
Yeah, Amelia, you have a hand up?
Yes, I have a question for you, and it's about you read some of your poems without reading them. You know them by heart. And I wonder about that process, because I think with my old brain, I don't think I could memorize anything. But I wonder about that. Something
Sure.
about it.
Yeah. I mean, probably maybe about a third of the poems I read tonight I know by heart, but sometimes I would still look at the page just because I get scared. It's actually more hesitancy than anything else. It's just, oh God, because then you stutter just that one word is wrong, and then everything gets thrown off. Whereas if you're looking at the page and you mess up on one word, you can just keep going. But if your eyes are closed and you mess up on one word, everything is thrown off. And I was like, oh gosh, where am I? So that happens. But yeah, probably about a third of those poems I've memorized. In terms of process, I don't know. I mean, part of my composition process to begin with is reading out loud, which hopefully it's the case for everyone, I think, just because of how important sound is to language. So that's part of my process anyway, is just reading out loud, just, even if I only have one line on the page, I just read that first line, as opposed to trying to tell a narrative. I don't have none of my poems I don't know where any poem's going. I don't know what the second line is from the first ever. I read a line, usually something involving an image or something, and then I just read it out loud over and over and over again until another line comes. Then I start on line 1 and read line 1 and 2 over and over again until the third line comes. And I just do that with every poem. So sometimes I've memorized a poem by the time I've completed it, just because I've read it out loud that often. So yeah, and then of course I'm also just kind of doing a decent number of readings and stuff these days. But yeah, I don't know, that's part of it. And sometimes I just I will just, I guess for fun, if you want to call it that, I'll sit there, with brand new poems, and I'll, you even when you think they're done, and then, maybe before I submit them, I'll put them away and then maybe wait a week or so and come back to see if I want to change anything. And then when I bring them back, say a week later, to decide whether or not I want to change them or submit them. And then I'll read them out loud a few more times. And then sometimes I'll kind of close my eyes and see how much of it I remember. So it just, yeah, Yeah, I mean, I don't do it in some sort of, I know what you mean. I don't do it in some sort of a painstaking way. I'm not actually trying to memorize them. I just say them out loud so often that it just, most of it sticks.
Thank you. That's awesome.
If I sat there and tried to do it as a rote memorization type of thing, no, that wouldn't work at all. It has to be something I want to do as opposed to have to do. Yeah.
It
I had
looks
a-
like-
Bruce. Oh, sorry.
It looks like we have I wasn't sure. So Bruce wants to say something, and I wasn't sure if David wanted to, and then Ryan.
Bruce, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, I just wanted to make a comment. Enjoy your poems. You're talking about something to me that was coming evident is that you must have an appreciation for jazz, because that's where the spirit of improvisation kind of rests, you know, in our musical culture.
Mm.
A jazz musician performance will not necessarily, you know, mimic the recording, and that's applauded, as opposed to, you know, some pop music groups. If you go to the concert, if you look at the audience, the people make up the audience, go to the concert hoping and pretty much expecting and demanding that the song sound like the record, you know, that
Mhm.
you're hearing on the radio. But the jazz audience doesn't want that. The jazz audience wants it to be different every time. And when you said that, you know, you'll sometimes throw in a different word,
Mhm.
and also go in a different direction with a poem. That to me, that spoke to me as a jazz enthusiast. Are you into jazz? Are you a jazz enthusiast?
I don't know as much about
That's my
jazz,
question.
but I absolutely, but I do, and that's
Am I
what,
coming?
but
Is
I-
it clear?
oh, sorry.
So my question to you is, do you have a appreciation for jazz, or are you a jazz enthusiast at all, or no?
Yeah, I appreciate, I appreciate the, I very much appreciate the quality of jazz that you just referenced is without a doubt my favorite part of jazz. And I appreciate any sort of musician, poet, or any sort of creative person who gets so swept up, whether they're recording or it's live, they get so swept up in the emotion, their own personal emotion behind what they're doing, that they end up changing something that was already in cement. So that's the part that I very, because that's what, of course, particular kinds of jazz are known for. So yeah, that element I particularly appreciate. And, you know, just the idea of being so comfortable. I don't want to use the word confident. I'm never confident about anything, but comfortable with your own vision and your own work, that you can kind of riff on it as you go. Because at this moment in my life, this is the word or the line I feel like saying. And I don't even know it until I'm reading out loud, but I've memorized most of it. So I get to a certain point in a poem where I'm like, no, I don't want to say that line. I'm going to do this other thing instead. So I very much appreciate, because that, I mean, in terms of music, that's one of the few forms that is known for that. So I definitely deeply appreciate that.
David, I wasn't sure if you had a question or not.
I was going to say, if only I could get my middle school students to read their stuff out loud over and over and over again, because I think it's such a useful, you know, one of the things that, and I'm going to word this wrong, in my writing journey, I muddle the genres so often, and you know, you seem to have this true, and abstract is the wrong way to put it, because I clearly get the visual of the pieces that you're writing, but your twist of phrase and stuff almost makes it this abstract thing of beauty that I have to think. You keep me thinking while I'm engaged in your poetry, and it's brilliant, and I really admire that.
Well, thank you. I don't know. So I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness. My brain just moves faster than I would like it to, and I'm not the most patient person in the world. All the more so since having kids. But no, but I don't know. It's one of those things. So again, it could be. I could try to be all fancy about it and be like, oh yes, because I've studied Robert Bly and his concept of the leap and all that, which I mean I have, but that's not really it. But it's not. What it is that I tend to just, instead of trying to tell a story, I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing going into every single poem. I'm equally terrified from the first poem to the one I wrote most recently. Same level of terror. It hasn't changed a bit because I have no idea if a second line is coming because I don't know what the story is. So I think part of it, and this is just my process, but because I don't know what's about to happen, anything could happen and anything does happen, right? So somehow a poem's there and then it's the Japanese internment camp and then it has something to do with this other thing and then this other thing and then my daughter's gender identity, and like somehow it all just shows up in the same poem because I just kind of follow my own logic or my own emotional logic behind, so it kind of jumps around. So I always have that fear of every single poem I write, that fear that, oh gosh, are any of these leaps so far that people can't follow them? Are they too personal, the leaps? Which is also partly why I often push imagery to the forefront, because even if someone isn't following my personal emotional train of thought there in a poem, they're not connecting the leaps necessarily. At least if there's enough heavy, connected, consistent imagery, at least you can follow that part of it. And you'll still get the same emotion, even if you didn't follow the trajectory, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I love how it keeps me working, to engage with your poetry, which keeps my attention, which I think is brilliant.
Thank you. That's partly why I read so slowly too. I'm originally from Boston, so when I was in my 20s and I would try to read those early poems, people just like, slow down, slow down, slow down. You gotta try to savor each bit, give it some breath so people can try to contemplate, then move to the next line. Yeah.
Okay, Ryan, I'm going to give you the last question. The pressure's on.
Okay. Thank you. Well, Amelia actually asked my question, but it gave me another question. John, thank you for your reading. I thought it was powerful, and yeah, I was struck by the way you delivered your poems, and it made me wonder how sounding them out figures into your process, and then you explained that nicely, so that all made sense, and it made me wonder, because I do a lot of the same things, and it made me wonder about revision. You talked about putting them away and bringing them back out, and kind of reciting them in your head and seeing what you remembered and what you didn't, and I think that could be part of the revision process. But I guess in my own experience, sometimes it makes revision hard because I've encanted those lines so many times. I'm like there's like muscle memory or something involved, and I have to remember, oh, I can change this. There's no reason I can't change this if I think of something that sounds better, or if somebody gives me a good suggestion. But I feel like it makes it more difficult, and I don't know that that's a bad thing. It's part of the process. But I'm curious about revision for you, and hearing how you compose one line after the other and you don't know what it's going to be. That makes me curious about revision. So that's my not very well articulated question.
I don't know how to ask questions myself. That's, I know what you mean. That's actually my wife, it annoys her, but that's how I usually talk. Is I have to get at the thing I want to get at. I have to get there. I don't understand people who just ask questions. I don't get it. Like, would you write it down in advance? I gotta get there mentally. So I totally get it. Yeah, in terms of like looking back, when I do potentially revise in the future, it's always tiny things, tiny things. In terms of language, it's almost always based on the sound or something like that. Generally, otherwise, I would say that I don't actually edit my poems at all, which I know is different than everything everyone's ever taught you. And I totally get that. It just, I know I was David, I was going to end up being a teacher for so long, but there's always, and that's how I've taught too, is the idea of, you want to get things out, you polish it later. Totally understand that. I mean, maybe I was like that, 20 some odd years ago, but I can't move on to line 2 unless line 1 makes my mouth water. Do you know what I mean? Unless I feel like a certain image or whatever isn't exactly the way I want it to be, even though I don't know what's coming next. But if it doesn't sound just right and look just right on the page, I can't move on to the next one. I can't. And I think it's because I'm not trying to tell a story. I think most of those do have 1 or 2 stories linked within them, but I'm not trying to. And so it's always tiny things I revise, if anything. And I'd say 90% of the poems I don't touch, but I do like to give it a little bit of breathing room. And it's because of that, because it's, and it's not about like perfectionism or whatever, but I have nothing to get out. I'm building the poem as I go. So yeah, so I barely revise at all, which is the opposite of what we tell all our students, but it just depends on your process.
Very interesting, Nancy. I have 2 quick follow-up questions. That's super interesting. Okay, so do you ever get to a point in a poem where something that comes along, you feel like it informs or changes something you wrote? You don't feel that way because this is my next part of the question. So is part of that philosophical or ideological, like a belief that the way it's coming out is how it's meant to be, and even if it's imperfect, imperfection is part of it? Or I guess does that make sense?
It does. That's a big question. I think it's outside my pay grade, but no, I know what you mean. No, definitely not an ideological thing. I that idea of perfection, it's so utterly subjective, in terms of saying, that, I don't know, how do I word this? But I think it comes naturally to me, but I tend to have multiple pivot points, at least one, but usually multiple pivot points in a poem where it seems like it's going somewhere. And again, I'm just following my own train of thought, honestly. But I feel like a poem is, let's just say it begins, there's a silo and it's at dusk, and then there's this and it's half full or what, I don't know, it's just some imagery. And then it turns into something from my childhood, which then as a white male growing up, maybe it goes there, and then that makes me think of something else. Like there were a couple, I think 2 different poems, was the idea that I remember when I was a kid, I had a tire swing, and then and obviously more in hindsight as an adult, is like, what I mean? It just, that connects to the idea that similar trees may have been used for very different purposes, therefore that reflects my privilege. So therefore, moving from the childhood to that type of socio-political or historical exploration, in my mind, makes sense. I make that connection, whether or not others do, but I make that connection. So I kind of just tend to follow those connections. So it's not like at the end I feel like that's, this is perfect and that's right, but it's also not the opposite. It's not like the Kerouac disembodied school of poetics type of stuff. I don't really love that myself. So I do sit there and polish and polish and polish. And I've spent 45 minutes to an hour deciding on if something should be an M dash or a semicolon and all that kind of stuff. I'm that long. But I can't move on to the next line until I've decided that piece of punctuation too. I just can't. There's just something it's not perfectionism. Maybe it's OCD, I'm not sure, but I can't keep moving until I'm happy with what's above. But yeah, so I don't know if I'm not quite sure if that answers, but
it does.
Yeah, it's not a matter of trying to perfect it. I just follow my own thought process in terms of where I make the connections, and then I do my best to try to word it in a way that maybe other people will make those same connections, which is why I also make up a lot of stuff in my poems. I consider poems fiction, not nonfiction. Unless a poet tells me this happened to me, I consider it fiction. So I just, my father was abusive in some of my poems. He's never hit me before. I have a brother that returned home from a war and was a very different person. I'm an only child. I make those things up because there's the truth behind a situation, and then there are the facts. And the facts are usually pretty gosh darn boring. How do people write memoirs? Facts are boring. So I make things up in order to get at the thing that I'm feeling that usually is based on a different experience. So I just kind of follow my heart and brain and see where the poem goes, and just keep pounding it as I go with a big dusty thesaurus open as I go and all that stuff.
Can I ask the quickest follow-up questions? Which is,
that was a quick question. Thank you. No.
in light
Sorry,
of
I had
your-
to. So
you got me. In light of your process, do you ever finish a poem and say this doesn't make the cut? It's never going in a book. And how many poems do you jettison?
Oh my
A
God.
lot?
More than half. Oh my God.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More than half of the poems don't make it into books for sure. And yeah, and it has to be based on the book. It's one of my favorite processes, honestly, putting together a book. But it's also that whole kill your darlings thing. For some reason, and I don't know why this is so frequently the case, the vast majority of the like big, top whatever 5 or 10 or whatever journals that have accepted my work, none of those have ever ended up in any of my books. For some reason, they just keep the larger journals always choose poems that when it comes time to, I print out all the poems that could potentially go into a book. So let's say I have 115 and I know it's going to go down to 65 or something. And I have them all out there in a group and I'm like, this poem's terrible. Or it just really doesn't work with anything, the rest of these poems. It's a one-off or whatever. And so, yeah, all the larger type journals, I've never included any of them, like the top one. They're not in any of my books. So, but it's great. I mean, it was published in there. Who cares? So I think some people include too much in their books. Yeah, I think that's the push. It's just, oh, I like this poem. It's like, yeah, but does it work with everything around it? So I think it's some of my favorite collections are, barely 50 pages. Every Carl Phillips book, I don't think that Carl Phillips has a book that's more than 55 pages, So I think it's all, it's just about tightness, really, more so for me than just expanding and look at the breadth of my work kind of thing. Because hopefully we all still have more poems in us. We all have more books in us. Maybe a poem you didn't make the cut ends up, and that's happened to me, where I was just like, nope, it doesn't fit in these books. Oh, it ends 2 years later, I'm going to put together another book. It fits in this one. Who knew? Maybe I feel differently about the poem. Maybe it fits thematically into the new book. Who knows? But yeah, as long as you submit it, if it ends up getting in a journal, even if it doesn't get in a book, who cares? It's still in the journal, It's still got its airtime.
Thank you, John, for your generosity and your creativity. Let's give him another round of applause, virtual applause. Thank you so much. Just another plug, I put links in the chat for the books and also John's email if you want to order directly from him. And just a reminder too, Art Center East has got 2 shows running right now. One is Sarah Bird's oil paintings, and the other is our Fiber Arts and Jewelry Show, which is an annual exhibit. We're at 1006 Penn Avenue here in LeGrand, and much of the artwork that's in the exhibit can be viewed on our website. The quilt behind me is being raffled off as a fundraiser. The quilt was made by Joy Cleaver. So it's really lovely, about a twin size quilt. So if you are interested in maybe being the lucky winner, come down and buy a few tickets. So we'll take just a 5-minute break. Let's come back at, let's say 8:17, and we'll start our open mic. I have David, Bruce, Tashawn, and Lindsay. Anybody else wanting to read tonight? Ryan, great. All right, 5 minutes.
Oh, real quick, Nancy, do you mind if I just was thinking about, I've only done this once before, but I was just saying, if anyone ended up wanting, if anyone wanted one from me, I actually have lots of copies of my last 2 books, which came out in 2019. So if anyone were to email me, they could also, you get a free copy of one of my older books. I had the last 2 books that came out in 2019 came out, two books the same year, came out just before COVID. I had one of them, I had a national tour for both of them, got boxes of books, boxes of them, and then COVID hit. So I have extra books, and that's fine. So if anyone wants either one of these, you can choose one of my 2 older books, and I'll just put that in the envelope with it, just so you know.
Great, thank you. Yeah, you'll be hearing from me. All right, 5 minutes.
Thanks, everyone.